Good evening. How are you? Good to see you, partially. Welcome, everyone, to the first event in the Fall 2021 Barbara and David Zalaznik reading series. I can't tell you how amazing it is to say that. We haven't said that in this space for about 2 years, so it's, I don't know why, it's emotional. So give yourself a round of applause to be here. My name is Aishan Hutchinson, and I am the current director of the Graduate Creative Writing Program at Cornell. I want to begin by acknowledging that this event is happening on the traditional homelands of the Cayuga Nation. I acknowledge their presence with our presence here today within the greater bond and magnitude of the triumphs and failures of history. I want to extend my gratitude to our donors, Barbara and David Zalaznik. Their generosity makes this reading series possible, continually possible, because even during the darker periods of the last 2 years, when we were unable to gather on campus, Barbara and David's unflagging support brought writers and poets to us in other formats. Their commitment made life then and now just a bit brighter. This evening's reading is also due to the generosity of Margaret Rosenzweig, who in 1980 established the Robert Chasen Memorial Poetry Reading in memory of Robert Chasen. Our guest is in good stead, as the most recent Chasen poets include her great contemporaries, Marlene Hacker and Claudia Rankine. To make brightness last whilst we're here together in this public venue, we must remain vigilant and conscientious about observing the indoor mask mandate and social distancing protocols. And here's something I haven't said in about 2 years. I want to remind you to silence your phones and other devices. There will be a Q&A at the end of the reading, after which I will direct you to the auditorium where books are available for sale thanks to Buffalo Street Books. You can purchase them and take them upstairs to the English Lounge to be signed. To be signed, that is, for a fee to be determined by me. Ithaca has officially moved into coat weather, which I hear is the appropriate fashion and season for poetry. Already the power of our guests is being signified. Yesterday at 2:21 p.m. was the autumnal equinox, one of the 2 days during the year when day and night are most nearly equal everywhere on earth. I think of Ada Limon's poetry as such a median force, both still and on its way, mercurial and steady. At 2:21 p.m. yesterday, when day and night were almost equal, I was inhabiting a poem of Ada's. Inhabiting because you live within, momentarily, momentously, a poem of Ada's. The same way or in a similar way you live within a house, or live within an equinox of changes, moving freely amongst what remains graspable and reassuring as a name. Names and naming, these are Ada's freedom, and they appear with an inexhaustible precision in her poetry. These poems know that the noun is action. Every name enacted is its own equinox. I learned this from Ada's poems. I am given new names. Even old names are new names, especially old names. And at precisely 2:21 p.m. yesterday, one of Ada's poems called my name. I was addressed into action. So you see, your own name or mine doesn't need appear in a poem of Ada's to directly be summoned into consolation outrage, and ecstasy. Ecstasy, yeah. All kinds of ecstasies exist in Ada's poetry through the act of naming. They're botanical ecstasies, for instance, and the ecstasies of the ornithologist. On birds, Ada is unmatched. There are ecstasies of the body's beauty and the body's revulsion, if not revolt. By ecstasy, I mean the primal sense of ecstasis, standing outside of oneself, still and on its way. But the inverse, that of standing inside of self, oneself, is most devastatingly true in Ada's poetry, mercurial and steady. These ecstasies are Ada Limon's freedom. 6 books of poetry and a 7th book on the horizon. Their acclaim and accolades are singular in contemporary American poetry, and far too many for me to name this evening. Name, there's that word again. It keeps calling to us. And now I remember Ada's poem of yesterday of 2:21 p.m. on the dot of the autumnal equinox. But I will hold off naming that poem in hopes that Ada reads it this evening. What I will remember as I invite her to call us forth outside and inside of ourselves was the last time I saw Ada. It was at a place unlike this. There's no autumn. It was in 2016 on a beach in Jamaica at my home during the greatest little literary festival on earth called Calabash. It was at night. The sea was a perfect silhouette of silver dark behind Ada as she read. And the sea of faces in front of Ada held forth their own bright shining awe. My friend, who sat next to me on the sand, whose face resembled the moment when the length of daylight and darkness are almost perfectly equal, turned to me and said, "Jesus Christ." Ada Limon.
Now I will attempt to lower this. I did it. Ta-da! And I'm done. That was such a beautiful introduction, Aishan. Thank you so much. And of course, I've been thinking about Calabash, just coming to see you, and it was an amazing, amazing thing. And so many things have felt like they've disappeared, right? Our gatherings, our groups, our celebrations, and it's just, I can't tell you how nice it is to be in this room. This is my only second in-person event that I've traveled for, that I've done, so in 20 months. So I feel really honored and grateful and humbled to be in this space, so thank you. And I will try not to get too emotional. I thought what I would do is read 5, 5, and 5. I don't know why, but I like to have some kind of organization. And I thought it gives you some sort of control in the otherwise uncontrollable scenario that is the poetry reading. You know, I once went to a poetry reading and someone came up and said, "Well, I'm working on this project. It's kind of endless." And I thought, oh no, did that person just say the word endless at a poetry reading? So this is more organized. This is I'm going to read 5 poems from my first, from Bright Dead Things, which is my 4th book, and then I'll read 5 poems from The Carrying, which is the 5th book, and then 5 poems from the new book that will be out in May, called The Hurting Kind, and 5 poems from that. So sort of in honor of, we talked about this today actually in my craft talk, which is about balance, which was in honor of equinox. We're going towards the light or we're going towards the dark, depending on what world you're living in. I'm going to start with a poem about, we were talking about this today, how those moments where it feels like, how am I supposed to go to the page when everybody has already done this? This is a poem about that. During the impossible age of everyone, 1, there are so many people who've come before us. Arrows and wagon wheels, obsidian tools, buffalo. Look out the meadow, you can almost see them. Generations dissolved in the blue grass and hay. I want to try and be terrific, even for an hour. 2, if you walk long enough, your crowded head clears, like how the cattle run off loudly as you approach. This fence is a good fence, but I doubt my own haywire will hold up to all this blank sky, so open and explicit. I'm like a fence, or a cow, or that word, yonder. 3, there is a slow tractor traffic hollering outside, and I'd like not to be traffic, but the window's shaking. Your shoes are piled up with mine, and the heat comes on, making a simple noise, a dog yawn. People have done this before, but not us. The love poem. This is a poem about all the different ways there is to be quiet. It's a prose poem. We've been dealing a lot with our quiet, haven't we? Our silence. The quiet machine. I'm learning so many different ways to be quiet. There's how I stand in the lawn, that's one way. There's also how I stand in the field across from the street. That's another way because I'm farther from people and therefore more likely to be alone. There's how I don't answer the phone, and how sometimes I like to lie down on the floor of the kitchen and pretend I'm not home when people knock. There's daytime silent when I stare, and nighttime silent when I do things. There's shower silent, and bath silent, and California silent, and Kentucky silent, and car silent, and then there's the silence that comes back 1,000,000 times bigger than me, sneaks into my bones and wails and wails and wails until I can't be quiet anymore. That's how this machine works. I think that's it. That's just how I make poems. Like if someone just asked me about my process, I think I could just send them the quiet machine. Something like this, I think. This is a poem for writers. I met with some amazing students today, and we had such a deep conversation, although I was offering my apologies because for every question they asked, I think I answered for about 20 minutes longer than I should have. But here's a poem for writers. Bellow. Tell the range and all that's howling, the flickers of life beyond the weeds, the vulture's furrowed brow of flight, the blasted, sticky Canadian lawn thistle. Tell the clowned out clouds and the rain and all that makes you go quiet again. Tell them you didn't come here to make a fuss or break or growl or scream. Tell them crazy stars and sky between. Tell them you didn't come to disturb the night air and throw a fit, but then get down in the dark and do it. This is what I do when I'm feeling like I can't deal with death. I have this whole second section of this book is about death, and I just sort of skip it. And I just notice it in myself. I'm like, okay, this is the second section. We always talk about you have to have those poems, and then you also have your recovery poems. So let's read a feminist poem instead. When I was a younger poet, notice I didn't say young poet. When I was a younger poet, I made the mistake, well, I don't like to say I have regrets, of falling in love with an older poet. And I followed him to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this poem was written right about the time I thought, I might need to get out of this relationship. Service. Somewhere outside of Albuquerque, I was all fed up with the stories about your ex-girlfriend's Guess billboard in New York City. And to make matters worse, I had to pee like a racehorse, or like a girl who'd had too much to drink way too far from home. You stopped at a friend's body shop to talk about a buddy who was stuck someplace in Mexico. You were talking, pulling strings, and taking pulls off a brown bottle, and no one told me where the restroom was. So I walked back to where the hot rods were displayed like dogs ready for a fight, baring their grills like teeth. I was hungry. The air smelled like hot gasoline and that sweet carnation smell of oil and coolant. A girl pit bull came and circled me as I circled the cars. She sniffed my ankles like I was her kin or on some sort of rescue mission. You were still talking, not a glance in the direction of me and the bitch, working our ways around the souped-up Corvettes and the power tools. The pit was glossy, well cared for, a queen of the car shop. And when she widened her hind legs and squatted to pee all over one of the car's dropped canvases, I took it as a challenge. That strong yellow stream seemed to be saying, girl, no one's going to tell me when to take a leak, when to bow down, when not to bite. So right then, in the dim lights of the strange garage, I lifted my skirt and pissed like the hard bitch I was. No regrets. That was 4 poems. This would be the last poem from my book, Bright Dead Things. I think of this as a apocalyptic love poem. Maybe we need those right now. The conditional. Say tomorrow doesn't come. Say the moon becomes an icy pit. Say the sweet gum tree is petrified. Say the sun's a foul black tire fire. Say the owl's eyes are pinpricks. Say the raccoon's a hot tar stain. Say the shirt's plastic ditch litter. Say the kitchen's a cow's corpse. Say we never get to see it. Bright star, stuck like a bum star, never coming close, never dazzling. Say we never meet her, never him. Say we spend our last moments staring at each other, hands knotted together, clutching the dog, watching the sky burn. Say it doesn't matter. Say that would be enough. Say you'd still want this, us, alive, right here, feeling lucky. I put it over here. I had a friend who once did a PhD, and every time he finished one of his books that he had to read for his PhD, he put it in the refrigerator. He was like, and now you must go into the refrigerator. That's what it just felt like to me. It's funny, I've never done this. It's like a little journey. I hope you're enjoying this little journey. I don't want to mention this, and yet I do feel it's important to mention my friends who's from Collierville, Tennessee, near Memphis. There was just a shooting once again in a Kroger. We don't know much, I don't think, yet. But she reached out to me because she knew that as soon as I heard the news, I would reach out to her and her family. So she reached out to me, and so it was the first thing I saw right before I left my hotel room. And so this is a poem about that. The Leash. After the birthing of bombs, of forks and fear, the frantic automatic weapons unleashed, the spray of bullets into a crowd holding hands, the brute sky opening in a slate metal maw that swallows only the unsayable in each of us, what's left? Even the hidden nowhere river is poisoned orange and acidic by a coal mine. How can you not fear humanity? Want to lick the creek bottom dry, to suck the deadly water up into your own lungs like venom. Reader, I want to say, don't die. Even when silvery fish after fish comes back belly up and the country plummets into a crepitating crater of hatred, isn't there still something singing? The truth is, I don't know. But sometimes I swear I hear it, the wound closing like a rusted over garage door, and I can still move my living limbs into the world without too much pain. Can still marvel at how the dog runs straight towards the pickup truck, breaknecking down the road because she thinks she loves them. Because she's sure without a doubt that the loud roaring things will love her back. Until I yank the leash back to save her because I want her to survive forever. Don't die, I say. And we decide to walk for a bit longer, starlings high and fevered above us, winter coming to lay her cold corpse down upon this little plot of earth. Perhaps we are always hurtling our bodies toward the thing that will obliterate us, begging for love from the speeding passage of time, and so maybe, like the dog obedient at my heels, we can walk together peacefully, at least until the next truck comes. This book does not start with that poem, but originally it did, and I had an editor who was a very smart person and was like, it's a little much to start the book. I was like, well, have you met me? I'm a little much. We were talking about this poem I mentioned this poem at least in the craft talk today, or the discussion today. And I'm just going to say that this is a poem for my mother. I have scoliosis, and I have done a lot of work to try to be straight. Not in that way. I haven't done that much work in that way. But to keep my crooked spine from being too crooked. The raincoat. When the doctor suggested surgery and a brace for all my youngest years, my parents scrambled to take me to massage therapy, deep tissue work, osteopathy, and soon my crooked spine unspooled a bit. I could breathe again, move more in a body unclouded by pain. My mom would tell me to sing songs to her the whole 45-minute drive to Middle Two Rock Road and the whole 45-minute drive back from physical therapy. She'd say that even my voice sounded unfettered by my spine afterward. So I sang and sang because I thought she liked it. I never asked her what she gave up to drive me or how her day was before this chore. Today, at her age, I was driving myself home from yet another spine appointment, singing along to some maudlin but solid song on the radio. And I saw Mom take her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon. My God, I thought, my whole life I've been under her raincoat, thinking it's somehow a marvel that I never got wet. We were talking about how some poems have an aboutness and some poems don't. And I was saying that's okay. Sometimes aboutness works and sometimes It's just lyrical pulsations, and we need that just as much. What poem now? Let's see. Oh, we talked about this poem came up today, so I'm going to read this one. This is a poem that I think is sort of about the difference between representation and tokenism. And there are times that many of us have felt that we've been invited into spaces because people have enjoyed our work and think that they'd like their students to hear our work, etc. And then there are other times where we have felt invited into spaces because we need to fill a quota or to have a little, box checked, and we can feel the difference. And this is a poem about that. It's also about my father. The contract says we'd like the conversation to be bilingual. When you come, bring your brownness so we can be sure to please the funders. Will you check this box? We're applying for a grant. Do you have any poems that speak to troubled teens? Bilingual is best. Would you like to come to dinner with the patrons and sip Patron? Will you tell us the stories that make us uncomfortable, but not complicit? Don't read the one where you're just like us. Born to a greenhouse garden, don't tell us how you picked tomatoes and ate them out of the dirt, watching vultures pick apart another bird's bones in the road. Tell us the one about your father, stealing hubcaps after a colleague said that's what his kind did. Tell him how he came to the meeting wearing a poncho and tried to sell the man his hubcaps back. Don't mention your father was a teacher, spoke English, loved making beer, loved baseball. Tell us again about the poncho, the hubcaps, how he stole them, how he did the thing he was trying to prove he didn't do. That's a true story. My father was my elementary school principal, if you wonder. You're like, oh, that explains a lot. But at one point he was in a faculty meeting with all the superintendents, and one person didn't want to park his car in a certain school district because he said the Mexicans there would just steal his hubcaps. My father, being Mexican, went out and stole the man's hubcaps. And then basically waited a whole month until the next meeting came, and my father wore a poncho and then brought him the hubcaps. And when my father retired from that school district, they gave him an engraved hubcap. His work was good. We love poems. Love poems. Really hard to do. Very hard to do. Has anyone here seen a horse being born? Yeah? Okay. It's a very weird experience. A horse just gives, there's just a horse comes out of a horse. Like there's nothing else. It doesn't even lie there. It just comes out, starts walking around. So for a long time I had this image with me and I was trying to figure out what to do with it, and then I turned it into this poem. You're like, where is this poem going? What I didn't know before was our horses simply give birth to other horses. Not a baby by any means, not a creature of liminal spaces, but already a four-legged beast hell-bent on walking, scrambling after the mother. A horse gives way to another horse, and then suddenly there are two horses. Just like that. That's how I loved you. You off the long train from Red Bank carrying a coffee as big as your arm, a bag with 2 computers swinging in it unwieldy at your side. I remember we broke into laughter when we saw each other. What was between us wasn't a fragile thing to be coddled, cooed over. It came out fully formed, ready to run. And I'll read one more from this book. That's from this book, The Carrying. It's so nice to be here. It does feel emotional. I'll close with this poem, which is also for writers. As we talked today about all the big ticket stuff, but then also what is it to just observe? What is it to just look? And the value in that. The last thing. First, there was the blue wing of a scraggly loud jay tucked into the shrubs. Then the bluish-black moth drunkenly tipping from blade to blade. Then the quiet that came roaring in like the R.J. Corman over Broadway near the RV shop. These are the last 3 things that happened. Not in the universe, but here, in the basin of my mind, where I'm always making a list for you, recording the day's minor urchins, silvery dust mote, pistachio shell, the dog eating a sugar snap pea. It's going to rain soon. Close clouds bloated above us, the air like a net about to release all the caught fishes, a storm siren in the distance. I know you don't always understand, but let me point to the first wet drops landing on the stones, the noise like fingers drumming the skin. I can't help it. I will never get over making everything such a big deal. You've made it through 10 poems. Congratulations. So now you have 5 more to go. It looks like I'm going to read from this whole book, and I'm not. I wanted to bring it into this space because it's my newest. And I thought I'd bring it all, just because it feels like it needs to be together. If you can see, my husband put an A+ on it. So, it's this high quality material here. Okay, so we'll just do 5 poems from here, and then we'll have a little Q&A. Are you guys feeling good? You good? Okay. This is a prose poem about birds. It starts with birds, and then it just goes someplace crazy. Calling things what they are. I pass the feeder and yell, grackle party. And then an hour later, I yell, morning dove after party. I call the feeder the party and the seed on the ground the after party. I'm getting so good at watching that I've even dug out the binoculars an old poet gave me back when I was younger and heading to the Cape with so much future ahead of me, it was like my own ocean. Tufted titmouse, I yell, and Lucas laughs and says, thought so. But he's humoring me. He didn't think so at all. My father does the same thing, shouts at the feeder announcing the party attendees. He throws out a whole peanut or 2 to the Steller's jay who visits on a low oak branch in the morning. To think there was a time I thought birds were kind of boring. Brown bird, gray bird, black bird, blah, 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 blah bird. Then I started to learn the names by the ocean, and the person I was dating said, "That's the problem with you, Lamone. You're all fauna and no flora." And I began to learn the names of trees. I like to call things what they are. Before, the only thing I was interested in was love. How it grips you, how it terrifies you, how it annihilates you and resuscitates you. I didn't know that it wasn't even love that I was interested in, but my own suffering. I thought suffering kept things interesting. How funny that I called it love, and the whole time it was pain. I keep thinking I have another poem, but it's your schedule. I keep laughing. I'm like, what? I don't think. Okay, this is a poem from my grandfather, Francisco Carlos Limón. Yeah. Heart on Fire. As a foster child, my grandfather learned not to get in trouble. Mexican and motherless, dead as she was from tuberculosis, he practiced words in a new language and kept his slender head down. When the other boys begged him to slip into the music shop's upper window to steal harmonicas for each of them, music being important, thievery being secondary, he refused. When the cops came to spot the boys who robbed the music store, they could easily find them by the ones spitting broken notes into the air, joyously mouthing the stainless steel, mimicking men on street corners busking for coins. But not my grandfather. He knew not to risk it all for a stolen moment of exaltation. It's easy to imagine this is who I come from, a line of serious men who follow the rules. But might I add that later he was a dancer, a singer, an actor, a cut-up, a ham whose best roles ended on the cutting room floor, who liked a good story, who would have told you life was a series of warnings, but also magic. Once he was sent for a box of matches, and he put the box of Strike Anywheres in the pocket of his Madras shirt and ran home. He ran so fast to be on time, to be good, and when he did so, the whole box ignited. So he was a boy running down the canyon road with what looked like a heart on fire. He'd laugh when he'd tell you this. A heart on fire, he'd say, so you'd remember. I'm going to read this poem because the person that made this a poem is in the audience. Jericho Brown, I'm calling you out. And not only is he a poet and enormously, generously, just marvelous human being, but an incredible editor. And he made this poem into this poem. Thank you. Sports. I've seen my fair share of baseball games, eaten smothered hot dogs in Kansas City and carne asada burritos in San Francisco in the sunny stands on a day free of fog. I've sat in a bar for hours watching basketball and baseball and the Super Bowl, and I've even high-fived and clinked my almost empty drink with a stranger because it felt good to go through something together, even though we hadn't been through anything. But the drama of a game, its players. If I'm honest, what I love, why I love, the sounds of the games, even when I'm not interested, half listening, is one thing. When my father and my stepfather had to be in the same room, or had to drop my brother and me off during our weekly move from one house to another, they, for a brief moment, would stand together in the doorway or the gravel driveway, and it felt like what true terror should feel like. Two men who were so different you could barely see their shadows attached in the same way. And just when I thought I couldn't watch the pause lengthen between them, they'd talk about the playoffs or the finals or whatever team was doing whatever thing required that season. And sometimes they'd even shrug or make a motion that felt like two people who weren't opposites after all. Once I sat in the car and waited for one of them to take me away. And from the back seat, I swear, they looked like they were on the same team, united against a common enemy, had been fighting all this time on the same side. Thank you. I don't think there's enough poems about step-parents and blended families out there. And there's so many of us that have them. And I think we need to dispel that myth of the evil others, always evil stepmothers and evil stepfathers, when so many of us have had abundance instead. 2 more poems. This is a poem that will be out in Poem-A-Day next month, and I think I want to say, it's hard to say this, but so many of us are writing these, but it deals directly with the pandemic. But also the word lover. People have strong reactions to the word lover. It's like, I saw a couple of people were like, ooh, don't say lover. I kind of like the word, but, it's hit or miss. There's a kind of a grossness to it. Lover. Easy light storms in through the window, soft edges of the world smudged by mist, a squirrel's nest rigged high in the maple. I've got a bone to pick with whomever is in charge. All year I've said, you know what's funny? And then nothing. Nothing is funny, which makes me laugh in an oblivion is coming sort of way. A friend writes the word lover in a note, and I'm strangely excited for the word lover to come back. Come back, lover. Come back to the 5 and dime. I could squeal with the idea of blissful release. Oh, lover, what a word. What a world, this gray waiting. In me, a need to nestle deep into the safekeeping of sky. I'm too used to nostalgia now, a sweet escape of age. Centuries of pleasure before us and after us, still right now. A softness like the worn fabric of a nightshirt. And what I do not say is, I trust the world to come back. Return like a word, long forgotten and maligned for all its gross tenderness. A joke told in a sunbeam. The world walking in, ready to be ravaged, open for business. And I'll close with this poem, which appeared in the New Yorker in May. And is that right? May 2020. See, I'm sure you're all having this feeling too. Like, I don't know dates anymore. Like was it 2 years ago? 3 years ago? The before times? Thank you so much for having me. The end of poetry. Enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple and seed, samara and shoot, enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy and the stoic farmer and faith in our Father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God not forgetting and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking up. Enough of the gun and the drama, the acquaintance's suicide, the long-lost letter on the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of ego. Enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child. And enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate. Enough of the brutal and the border. Enough of, can you see me? Can you hear me? Enough, I am human, I am alone, and I am desperate. Enough of the animal saving me. Enough of the high water. Enough sorrow. Enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. Thank you. Thank you.
Ada, we can take some questions.
Yes, I would love to.
Ada is willing to take some questions if you have any. She will also say lover again. Can you just raise your hand if you have it? And yes.
Actually, speaking of lover, so lover versus amante. I just wanted to hear.
Well, I mean, they're kind of the same, right? I mean, I think the thing that people have trouble with the word lover is that there feels like there's also sort of an extra curricular part of it, right? Like there's your love, and then there's your lover. But I think it can be interchangeable too. I do. I think it can be kind of like, can your love be your lover? I think so. So to me, they're the same.
So I was thinking about your poem about the horse, how the image stuck in your mind inspired your poem. On the other hand, I was wondering, are there ever times if you're writing and you have imagery going through your head, and do you edit your words based on the ideas that you see?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times what brings me to the page is not an image. Sometimes it's a word, like the word lover, right? Sometimes it's just an overheard piece of conversation, or sometimes it's an actual physical pain and I don't actually know what's up, but I have to interrogate it in order to get to whatever it is that's deeply unsettling. And I think that if I'm editing images as I go, I'm very interested in the mind, and its weirdness, and how much time we spend trying not to be weird, right? And not admitting to those images. And then poetry is this place you get to be weird. You get to be like, this is what my mind just did. Look at that. So honestly, when I'm working at least on the first draft, as Jericho can probably tell you, I just let my mind go. And then, afterwards, when it's getting prepared for a reader, then some of those images need to come out. And it's not that those images are bad. It's just that they're not serving the whole thrust of the poem and making the whole poem feel complete. My brain likes to go on tangents. And so oftentimes I'll put them in there, but then they'll come out in what is the, fifth or sixth or final draft. Thank you.
On a related note, a horse comes out of a horse is such a good line. If you were revising that poem today, would you be tempted to try to work it in?
I mean, it's kind of there. No, I think I wouldn't. No, I think that poem, for me, has to be, it has enough of sort of a jokiness, which I like, but then it has to switch really quickly and pivot into its love poem. And so it's a little bit of a balancing act where I can't make it too jokey, that I might be able to do in an introduction, but I need its tightness. Look, I'm pulling reins. I need to hold the reins in to make sure that it can pivot that quickly in the center.
On the same note too, like I'm even thinking about, because it starts with the horse and it ends with the horse singing. Mm-hmm. And then anyone at the wedding, you know how wedding have like wedding music, like people can just put their own love music in the middle and they can use that poem as their wedding poem.
Yeah, it could be their own personal image. Yeah.
I hope you make a ton of money.
I love it. A marketing genius over here.
Poetry books don't make money. But I have a question about line breaking, especially like this. Those poems are kind of seen on the page, and I'm kind of mediating in my head and imagining how they look on the page. And I remember Victoria Chang saying that when she wrote poems, she wrote it in straight lines and she doesn't lineate until when it's time to lineate. So I became curious after that to hear different poets. How do you, because you let your mind go, right, in the first draft. Do you let the lines go as well?
Yeah, everything's lineated as I write. I do not write in sentences unless I'm working specifically in a prose poem. I really believe in the units of poetry, because we get to work with the smallest unit. Like the smallest unit isn't even the word, it's the sound. It's the syllable. And then we get the spaces in between the words, and then we get the word, and then we get the clause, and then we get the line. I mean, the sentence isn't even there yet. So I like to work in the units of poetry. And so even when I'm composing, I compose directly in lines, even if it's in my notebook. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming, Rita. Along the lines of lines and sound, I heard an interview, I think it was with the New Yorker Poetry Podcast, with you and Natalie Diaz about your gorgeous envelopes of hair. And in that, I think you said that you had started drafting sometimes out loud. And I was wondering, the way you write and the way you speak and even the way you move your hands when you read is so, it's like your grandfather dancing, it's so musical. And I was wondering, do you draft out loud? Do you speak the lines as they come, or do you put them on the page and then speak them? I'm just so curious about that.
Thank you for that. I just realized I haven't been repeating the questions, and I realize you probably haven't been able to hear, but hopefully you've been building them a little bit into my answer. But the question was whether or not I compose the poems out loud, because they have that sort of, being read out loud quality to them. And yeah, I compose most of my poems actually out loud. Some of them are actually out loud prior to the page. I think the end of poetry began with enough of Osseous and Chickadee. That was like, and I just was like, there was something in there that was like, I needed to play with. But a lot of times I'll read the first line, get the second line, and then I stop, and then I'll read the first and second line, then I read the third, and then I'll read it's very much a sonic practice for me. Yeah, so it feels like I need to deliver it into the body, however that is. So it's both the ear, the mouth, the eyes. It has to be a full sensorial experience for me, and then it becomes more tangible. And I don't know how to edit without that either. So it definitely feels like it's more of the Lorca's duende, right, where it's not coming from outside. It's not the angel or the muse, right, in sort of Western, but instead it's coming from the duende, which is like in the soles of the feet, in the bloodstream already. And so I feel that way. I hope it translates into what I'm doing. But yeah, I definitely feel like that auditory sonic quality is important to me in how the poems are built from the beginning. Thank you for that.
I think the leaf is a great example of this. In so much of your work, you're not afraid to look at grief and violence and death and suffering, but yet there's such a hopeful tone in so many of those pieces as well. And I was wondering how you find the balance between looking at darkness in the world and then still feeling hope.
Yeah. That's a great question. We talked about this today a little bit in my conversation, which is how you find that sort of hope, that thread of hope, that thing that kind of brings you outside of, I always say you go down to the bottom of the well, but you need to bring a ladder. Like you need to have your ladder out of the well. And it's too often we're like, oh, I'm going to go work on poems, and we just go in the bottom of the well. And then it's like, how do we get out? And I think, I'm always trying to bring my ladder with me. And sometimes the poem itself is a ladder, because the ladder is saying like, you've done this, you've made this, you've transformed, right? You've transformed whatever is hurting you right now into something. So I think that's part of it. I think the making in and of itself is that thread of hope. But I also feel like, and maybe it's the hard worker in me, but I feel like surrender is easy. I feel like giving up is the easy choice. And I won't do that. And I think I won't do that for my ancestors who didn't give up, and people who went through so many things. And we are at a very, very hard time, and I believe it. But every time I sort of want to like lay on the floor and, eat ice cream and then, take a million pills, I decide that actually, in reality, that's the easy choice. The hard choice is to say, I want to keep doing this. Sign me up. And I believe in making that choice.
Ada, you're not lying on the floor right now. We can take about 2 more questions and then we have to move forward. I know your hand was up and then behind you. Go ahead.
This is not a literary question, but can I ask what you, what images of Northern California do you go back to most often?
I love that Northern California question. What images I go back to, what I hold in my heart, and I'll tell you this very truthfully, it's in my dreams almost every night. I grew up across the street from a creek called the Calabasas Creek. If you know Northern California, most of our creeks are pretty dry. There's kind of a dribble, and I would just be like, it's the most beautiful thing. And everyone's like, it's like a puddle, I go back and I'm like, this was a mud puddle. But in my mind, it's like this beautiful rushing creek, and I still, it's where I think most of my poems come from. Part of it is because it was underneath an overpass. So it was underneath Arnold Drive, so there was an actual road that went over it. And I could sit underneath it and feel like life was up there, and this was the below part, the underneath part. And I think that's where I live. Things are getting weird up here.
Can you make it weirder?
One more question.
Thank you for being here, first of all. And I'm curious, this is a good last question, about the endings of so many of your poems. They end often wonderfully in this mic drop sort of way where it sort of forces you to pay attention to them, and with often a lot of grace involved. And I'm curious, as a lot of writers struggle to end things, I'm curious of how your endings work in your writing process, where you come to them, and how you know something is, this is where I want to stop.
Yeah, endings are, I'm obsessed with endings. Jericho Brown has some of the best endings ever written. I feel like for me, my obsession with endings comes from, I think that for the most part when endings fail, or when my endings fail, I'll say, for me, is because I haven't made a choice. It's because I feel like this sort of moment where I'm like, oh, whatever, anything could have happened. You could read it however you want. That's when my endings fail. But it's the choice. I think that there's also something about poetry that it is very hard to leave a room, right? And be like, this is what I've done, this is what I've made. And I think that when you're making a poem, at the ending comes down to making a choice. And once I figured that out on my own in terms of like how I write, I realized that when endings weren't working, it was because I was sort of like, oh, I'll just have everything sort of end in a duality or a blur or a sort of like, that whole end on an image. We can be like, and my grandfather, blah, 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 and then we'd be like, look, a bird. I was like, that's awesome. I want to end on an image. And that, and then the work of like, what is it to really make a choice? So to me, that's the biggest thing, is that when our endings fail, is that we don't actually make a choice.
I want to have a book title, When Our Endings Fail. By Ada, thank you so much. Thank you so much. We don't have to quite end yet. Please purchase books. The table is right here. You can form a queue and get those. Then Ada will sign them upstairs. So thank you again for joining us, and please visit our website for the next upcoming readings. Thank you so much.